asking our neighbors to take down their cameras, a matter of privacy and safety. When my family moved into our new home 2 years ago, we were filled with excitement and anticipation. We had spent months searching for the right place, a peaceful area that offered the kind of privacy and seclusion we were looking for. The house was set on a generous plot of land, and behind it was a small wooded area that seemed perfect for long walks, quiet afternoons, and simply being able to enjoy nature. This wooded area, with its tall trees and a winding creek, quickly became one of my favorite parts of our property. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could go to unwind, read, think, or simply listen to the sounds of the forest. However, when we moved in, something felt a little off. As we explored the woods behind our property, we noticed several small, camouflaged cameras strapped to the trees. At first, I assumed they were some kind of wildlife cameras placed by the previous owners or perhaps a local nature enthusiast. But after we made ourselves familiar with the neighbors next door, we learned that the cameras were, in fact, theirs. They explained that they had installed them to watch the wildlife in the woods, particularly to monitor animals for their young. Son. This didn't seem like an entirely unreasonable request at first, but something about it made me feel uneasy. Despite my discomfort, my mother, for reasons that I still don't fully understand, gave our neighbors permission to leave the cameras up. She felt that since they were merely observing wildlife and didn't pose any immediate threat to our privacy, it wasn't a big deal. I, on the other hand, felt differently. While I could understand the curiosity about wildlife, I couldn't shake the feeling that having cameras aimed at our property was an invasion of privacy. It wasn't just the thought of being filmed. It was the idea that someone, without my knowledge or consent, could be watching me in my own backyard, especially in the more secluded areas of our land. As time passed, my unease grew. The wooded area behind our house became more and more important to me as a space where I could truly be alone. I began going there more often, looking for a place where I could relax and escape from the stresses of everyday life. It became a place where I could enjoy the beauty of nature without feeling constantly observed. But every time I went out there, I couldn't forget about the cameras. Even though I knew they were supposed to be monitoring wildlife, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching me, perhaps even unintentionally capturing moments that I didn't want to be shared or recorded. It became clear to me that I didn't feel fully comfortable on my own property anymore. The idea that my every movement in the woods might be recorded without my consent, no matter how innocent or mundane, began to weigh on me. I want to be able to go out there and feel free, to enjoy the peace and solitude without wondering if someone is watching. Whether I'm going for a walk or spending time near the creek, I want to be able to do so without the looming presence of those cameras. I've never done anything inappropriate or unlawful, but the idea of being filmed without knowing who is watching made me feel vulnerable. It wasn't just about privacy, it was about my sense of safety, comfort, and personal freedom. In recent months, my discomfort with the cameras has intensified. We've noticed something else that's been adding to our sense of unease. At night, we've started to see people in our woods. These aren't our neighbors, at least not that. We can tell. We don't know who they are or what they're doing in our property, but it's unsettling. They're often seen rummaging around the woods at night, sometimes making strange noises or disturbing the natural environment. This only compounded my feelings of discomfort. I began to worry that the cameras, which are obviously still in place, might be making it easier for unknown individuals to lurk around in the woods. After all, if someone is watching footage from the cameras, they could be taking note of our habits or movements. The idea of strangers having access to this kind of information made me feel incredibly unsafe. It's one thing to have cameras monitoring wildlife, but it's another when those same cameras could potentially be feeding information to people we don't even know. This situation reached a breaking point when I realized that the creek behind our house had become a place I avoided, not because I didn't want to go there, but because I didn't want to feel watched while I was there. The creek is beautiful, and it's a spot where I should be able to relax, perhaps even wear a swimsuit, or just sit and enjoy the water. It's a sanctuary, and I don't want to feel like I'm under surveillance while I'm simply trying to unwind. I began to ask myself, why should I have to feel uncomfortable in my own yard, on my own property? Why should I have to consider whether or not I'm being filmed every time I step outside to enjoy the natural surroundings? After much internal debate, I finally decided that I had to address the situation. We had every right to privacy on our property, and that included the woods behind our house. While I understood that the neighbors had their reasons for wanting to monitor wildlife, I felt that it was no longer a reasonable request. It wasn't just about the cameras themselves, but the ongoing sense of discomfort and intrusion that came with knowing they were there. I wanted to be able to relax, enjoy my own space, and walk through the woods without feeling like I was constantly being watched or recorded. So, I made the decision to speak to our neighbors and ask them to take down the cameras. I knew it wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but I also knew it was necessary. I needed to be clear with them about how I felt and explain that, while I appreciated their interest in wildlife, their cameras were making me feel unsafe and uncomfortable. I understood that they had good intentions, but their actions were negatively impacting my family's sense of security and privacy. It was my hope that, after explaining the situation, they would understand and be willing to respect our wishes. The conversation was, in fact, difficult. Our neighbors were initially surprised and taken aback by my request. They had assumed that we were okay with the cameras because my mother had given them permission years ago. But once I explained how uncomfortable I felt with the constant surveillance, and how it had only become worse with the strange activity in our woods, they started to see things from my perspective. I told them that it wasn't personal, and that I understood their desire to monitor the wildlife. However, the situation had changed, and it no longer felt right for us to have cameras filming our property without our consent. In the end, they agreed to take down the cameras. I was relieved, but I also knew it was a difficult decision for them. They had become accustomed to having the cameras in place, and it wasn't easy to admit that it was making their neighbors uncomfortable. But I also felt a sense of empowerment, like I had reclaimed my privacy and the right to feel safe in my own home. I thanked them for understanding and for agreeing to respect our wishes. Looking back, I'm glad I had the courage to address the situation. It wasn't just about the cameras. It was about asserting my right to privacy and setting boundaries that make me feel safe and comfortable in my own space. I've learned that sometimes, even small issues can escalate if left unaddressed, and it's important to speak up when something feels off. I hope that our neighbors will respect our space and privacy moving forward, and that we can continue to live in a peaceful, mutually respectful environment. Would we have been considered unreasonable if we hadn't asked them to take down the cameras? Maybe to some it might have seemed like a small issue, but to me, it was about much more than just cameras. It was about having control over my own environment and feeling free to exist in it without being watched. I'm glad I stood up for myself and for my family, and I hope it serves as a reminder that our right to privacy should always be respected, especially in our own home.